I just do first names. Right, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats because we have another prize to give out. Cards Against Cryptography is the game everybody is playing, or they certainly were playing it at Asia Crypt. Look at the Twitter feed for Asia Crypt. You can see there's some really amazing cards in the pack. And over to Brian.
Thank you, the owner of Nigel Smith's new Hawaiian shirt, which is a white card in the pack, by the way, which pairs up with many black cards in many interesting ways, as you can see from the Twitter feed. Okay. So I am wearing two hats right now. I'm wearing my hat both as a member of the RWC Steering Committee and as treasurer of the International Association for Cryptologic Research, of which RWC is the first of our 8 events of 2019. Now, the award that I'm going to give out is going to Nicole Fern. Nicole, would you please come on up? Now let me explain why Nicole's getting this award. Because Nicole is getting the other deck of Cards Against Cryptography. Nicole, say hi to everybody.
Hi.
Nicole is the 642nd registrant to RWC 2019. Crypto 2018, which was held in Santa Barbara in August, had 641 registrants, and was, to that point, the largest attended IACR event ever. Nicole's registration pushes RWC over the top and reestablishes RWC as the most attended IACR event, because our previous record was 605 that was set at RWC last year. So Nicole, thank you for coming to RWC. And for helping RWC become, once again, the leading most attended IACR event. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're on with the show, and you may have noticed this afternoon is the KU Leuven show. So there's lots of the KU Leuven things, but these speakers are not from KU Leuven. They are from Michigan and Adelaide. Yes, I was just forgetting where you were these days. Okay, so we're over to Daniel and Yuval, who are going to tell you about Foreshadow.
Thank you, Nigel, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And this is a work that is done with a long list of collaborators and a short list of affiliations. And the work is about Foreshadow, extracting the keys to the Intel SGX. So a bit of motivation. We all know that we want to run multiple programs of multiple users on the same computer, and for that we need someone to maintain law and order. And we have our operating system that manages the resources, and it also enforces protection, so one user cannot access data of another user. But operating system can sometimes go bad. And they can be compromised, or the operating system is not under our control, so we don't necessarily trust this operating system. This is commonly happen in cloud scenarios, for example. And the problem with that is that operating system has some superpowers, and it can get to all of our data, and that means that if we don't trust the operating system, we lose control of our own data. So to solve this problem, Intel gave us a present. And the present is SGX, Secure Guard Extensions. This is a set of CPU features that are designed to allow us to remotely run secure computation. And I'll quote some of Intel's description of this feature. Basically, what we do is we take the sensitive code, or the code that handles sensitive data, and we put it into what's called enclave. And these enclaves are protected areas, and ensure their security is guaranteed by the processor. So for confidentiality and integrity, they are enforced below the operating system, below the hardware level. So we don't need to trust anything. Everything can be compromised, and we still are ensured that our data is confidential and its integrity is maintained. And furthermore, we have a new nice feature that can guarantee to us, without having access to the physical computer, that the computer is really running a genuine Intel platform that we can trust, and that the program is running inside an enclave, so it is protected from everything else around it. And this feature has been around for almost 3 years now, so it's available in most computers that people now use. So to summarize the security model, we no longer need to trust anything. We don't trust the memory. We don't trust the hardware components. We don't trust operating system at various levels. The only thing we trust is our CPU. We trust our code in our enclave. That's our code, so we can trust it. And we have some mechanism that ensures that that this is the situation, that we don't have that the enclave is a real enclave running on a genuine CPU. How does Intel protect the context of the enclave? So for that, we allocate part of the physical memory that's called the enclave page cache. It's typically 93 megabytes with some possibility of changing, but that's the typical value. And everything in this enclave page cache is encrypted. So when it goes to the RAM, this is encrypted, 128-bit security, AES. If someone has control of the RAM, they cannot get the data. They only get the encrypted data. It is also it's also authenticated, so protected against changes. And the key is generated automatically at boot time. It's not written anywhere inside the processor, and it is never given to software. So as long as we trust the processor, we know that no one can get access to the physical memory. We also need to protect this memory from access from within the computer, so software access into this memory region. And in this case, because we don't trust our operating system, there is no point in generating a trap when someone tries to access that. So instead, what we have is what's called abort page semantics. And abort page semantics are very simple. If anything but the enclave tries to access the memory of the enclave, what they get is in write, the write is ignored, and in read, we get all ones, or 0xFF or -1. So we are guaranteed that no one can access our memory either from outside of the processor or from inside the processor. And then we have one thing that we do trust the operating system. The operating system does maintain availability. And what it has the ability of maintaining the typical operating system protection on pages inside the EPC. And it can swap pages in and out. And when it swaps a page out, the page is automatically encrypted on the way to the operating system, so the operating system cannot see what is there. And when it swaps a page in, it is automatically decrypted, and it's verified, and the SGX verifies that the page has not been modified, and verifies that this is not an old version of an enclave, so it protects against a replay attack. So this is beautiful, and we have a secure system that can ensure secure execution. If we read the threat model, we find the fine print. And the fine print is that SGX does not provide protection from side channels. And that's the responsibility of us as developers to do this protection. And that's a beautiful security model because we cannot break the protection from side channel attacks. If we don't have protection, we can't break it. Okay. So with that, we need to go back to the early 2018, and when we became aware of more side channel attacks. And the two works that we had the pleasure of being involved with are Meltdown, which is basically a bug in the processor that allows users to access kernel memory, and Spectre, which is a design flaw in processors that allow users to bypass protection boundaries. And after some protection or defense work that has been published, what we still have is that basically we can bypass the protection boundary between the user and kernel memory. So modern operating systems do not use the kernel, do not use this boundary. KPTI moves the kernel to a totally different address space. We can bypass language-based protection. So we need additional protections inside managed languages that enforce memory protection. And under some scenario, we can bypass cross-process protection, assuming that we have some gadgets that are vulnerable in the target process. But all of these still leave the SGX protection still intact. So now what we'll do is we'll try a demo. And hopefully, if the demo codes are with me, we'll see that really abort page semantics protect SGX. So what we have here is a program that tries to apply the same technique as Meltdown to an SGX enclave. And we run it, and we get the data out. And the data is all FFs. So that's abort page semantics, and it probably works, hopefully works. OK, so with that, we'll move to foreshadow, and I'll hand over to Daniel for that.
OK, thanks, Yuval. So what is foreshadow? So fundamentally, foreshadow exploits a nasty feature in Intel's implementation of the So fundamentally, foreshadow exploits a nasty feature in Intel's implementation of the memory or the virtual to physical memory address translation. So what happens? Let's say that we have a virtual to physical memory address translation that along the way this requires walking over multiple page tables, and along with the way of doing this translation, we discovered that something went wrong and we cannot proceed to do the translation. Either the thing is not in physical memory, the mapping doesn't make sense, we don't have permissions to access that specific address, something went totally wrong. So that instruction that caused that access is flagged as faulty, and when the instruction retires, it would be handled, we will have a segfault, the operating system would be called to clean up this mess. But in the meanwhile, address translation failed. And as it fails, whatever temporary values it had computed before it failed are left in place somewhere inside the processor. This is dangerous, but we can still sort of manage it because it's marked as faulty. But what comes after address translation? Well, after address translation, we do memory accesses. And this is where it becomes funny, because whatever the intermediate value was before the address translation failed, it is used as a physical address, and the memory access is performed. But not only it's performed, they wanted to get as far as get the memory access as quickly as they can out of the way, so they skipped all the permission checks. So the check for abort page semantics is it SGX memory? That's not done. Boundaries between virtual machines are ignored. Even the system management mode, nobody checks whose memory is it anyways. Why not do the access? OK, that's scary by itself, but it gets better. Because as soon as we have an L1 hit, if the data happens to be in memory, it is given to the execution core to operate over and to leak through a side channel. Of course, at some point, the CPU is going to realize that all of this has transpired, that this mapping makes absolutely no sense, that the sanity of this process has been totally lost, and will undo the execution back to where it's back to the faulty address translation and try to unroll everything back. But well, by then it's too little, too late. The value is already leaked. That's foreshadow at a high level. And now that we've seen it, let's actually see how foreshadow operates. So I have my virtual memory right here. And in my virtual memory, I have a region for the enclave page cache, which is where SGX data lives. And I have a pointer which points to some data for the enclave page cache. I'm from userland, and I'm trying to read that data. And for the purpose of this slide, I'm even going to assume that the data is somehow cached inside the L1 cache. So how would I read that data? So the first thing to do is I have to create a fault when I access this memory. I have to have a faulty address translation process, right? Because I want all the permission checks to be skipped. How do I do that? Well, there is a nice system call from that operating system provide called mprotect, which allows the user to mark a piece of data as if it's not present in the virtual memory and it actually resides on disk. Now, of course, it's very much present. It's so present that it's even cached. But we are going to pretend it's not there and mark it as not present, at which point the operating system must be trapped as soon as an access is performed because somebody has to swap it back in. But for now, we're going to mark it as if it's not present. And then I'm going to have my standard Meltdown code. I'm going to take a pointer, and I'm going to read its value. Well, it's my pointer. It's OK to have it. So the memory subsystem says OK, and the pointer is brought to the cache and to my attacker. Then I'm going to take pointer and dereference it. This is not cool. This is SGX memory. Why am I dereferencing SGX memory? Well, it's not my memory. I'm not allowed to do it. The memory subsystem is going to scream stop, stop, stop. It's going to scream stop because it's not there instead of issuing abort page semantics. So we have a faulty address translation process. It's obviously not there, right? It's marked as if it's on disk. But instruction is flagged to trap when it retires this dereference. No permission checks are done. But we have an L1 hit, and nobody cares whose cache line is it anyways. And therefore, what this value, what the cache subsystem responds by giving the value to the attacker. So the attacker just learned a value from SGX memory. The only problem is that time is very short for this monster because at some point the CPU is going to discover this. So we need to, as quickly as we can, leak it out through a cache side channel. So let's do precisely that. We take 3, which is our piece of data, multiply by 256. This is to avoid cache prefetching. And use 768, which is the resulting value, as an index to array 2. So array 2 of 768 is brought to the cache. Now, this program is totally insane. It accesses the value that is obviously not present. And at some point, the processor is going to discover this and trap the operating system. And because it traps the operating system, that program can get killed. The memory space will be trashed. We're going to undo everything we had done and issue a trap instead. And this monster, the green monster, is now dead. And we have restored sanity, right? Because it forgot the value 3 that it knew at some point. Of course, before it died, it left a tombstone. And on the big tombstone, it wrote something. This thing is still here and it's still cached. Nobody undid the cache. So we need a way to recover the value from the cache. And for that, I'm going to bring up my friendly red monster. And the red monster is going to query array 2 of 512. Oh, sorry, of 256. Well, nobody touched array 2 of 256. So it's going to take a long amount of time to bring it from the virtual memory. So, OK, the value was not 256. Let's try array 2 of 512. Again, it's going to take a whole amount of time. So it's not 512 either. But as soon as I touch array 2 of 768, it's going to come back super quickly because it's cached. So I know that the only reason why it's cached is because the green monster cached it before it died. So the value must be 3. That's it. I just read a value from within SGX. And what's the difference between a trick and a method? A method is a trick that works more than twice. This would work on the entire SGX memory. So let's recap. What did we see? SGX was aimed to offer security in a model where everything is corrupted except the CPU. That's what they promised. What did they deliver? Well, because page table isolation, the meltdown countermeasures were not applied to SGX, the attack I just showed you worked from userland. So in a world post-meltdown, you're better off trusting the kernel, which is protected, than to trust SGX, which you can dump from userland. Lovely. So that's what happens when you don't have a rogue OS. But wait, SGX is designed to protect against rogue OSs. So let's assume a hostile operating system. In that case, it gets much worse. Remember that saying it's up to the developer's responsibility to address any side channel concerns? It can't be done. The reason why it can't be done is because there are enough tricks in the SGX ecosystem on how to get data in the cache without having the target enclave even run. So it booted up, it has a secret in its belly, and all I need to do is to get the data to the cache so I can read it. And there is a way to do this without having the code of that enclave ever execute after initialization. And then if it's cached, I can try reading it. And if it doesn't work for the first time, well, I'm the operating system, so I'm just going to rewind the entire thing and try again, and again, and again, until I get my data. Bottom line is that Foreshadow can read 100% of the data almost 100% of the time. And just to show you how devastating this is, let's try the previous demo, but this time with a bit more passion, with all the tricks we have learned from Foreshadow. And as soon as I launch it, we see the text clearly appearing on the screen. And this is taken from Intel's Security First pledge. Well, they explain to you that Intel security has been one of their highest priorities. And for years, they have been working to have security in every product they create. OK, that's what happens when you have a leaky chip and a good side channel, and a hostile operating system. You see no measurement errors. This was done live on my SGX as a box. OK? That's what happens when you have just a bit of side channel leakage. But it gets worse. It gets worse. How can this be even worse than that? Before worse, let's do some philosophy. If a tree falls down in the forest, and there is nobody out to see it fall and hear it fall, does it make a sound? Should we even care? Well, some trees fall than others, and I would hope the owners of this car cared. OK, but let's try an easier question. We're all security experts here. So I have a brand new machine that I bought off a trusted source, eBay. And as soon as I installed it at my home, it got hacked. It got severely compromised. But it's brand new, and I didn't put any data on it. Are we safe? Shall we even care about this scenario? Well, it depends on context, depends on the machine. Because every SGX machine is capable of obtaining a prized asset, SGX EPID keys. And never fear, Intel had promised us that these keys would never see the light of day, and no way you can extract them from any SGX machine. Well, unless Foreshadow, in which case you can kind of do it, and we actually went ahead and did it, and we recovered an EPID key. All right, so we are now in possession of this object, which is called an EPID key. What can we do with this? What can go wrong? Well, for this, I need to show you what EPID is. So EPID stands for Enhanced Privacy ID. It's Intel's remote attestation protocol. And we have here a cloud, we have a client, and the cloud would like to prove to the client that it is running a genuine SGX hardware on genuine Intel machines. So how do we do this? Well, the processor takes the enclave code it's about to run, hashes it down, and signs it with an EPID key, and producing something that is called a quote. That quote is sent to the client. The client can't verify it by itself anyways, so they must go to the Intel attestation server. As soon as the Intel attestation server says yes, yay, OK, then it is possible for the client to establish a TLS tunnel directly into the enclave, into the brain of that processor somewhere on the cloud. And nobody in the middle can read that traffic. The takeaway from this slide is that the trust of this entire attestation process depends on one thing, on the EPID keys, and on the fact that the processor is only willing to sign certain enclaves with EPID keys, and that only genuine Intel hardware can get those EPID keys to begin with. Well, we got one. Another key important observation about this slide is that Intel here is in a privileged position. They know who started an enclave, when, what, where, and on which machine. And they didn't want to be responsible for that information. So because of that, they use a protocol called EPID, which stands for Enhanced Privacy ID. It's a group signature with epic privacy guarantees. It's unlinkable, and it's also unlikable. But the main thing is it's unlinkable, which means that nobody knows who signed what. I cannot link a quote to its owner. Now, unfortunately, with enhanced privacy comes enhanced responsibility, because a single extracted EPID key can be used to sign millions of quotes without anybody knowing who signed what, which means that one key erodes the trust in the entire ecosystem. So to help facilitate this erosion of trust, I give you S. S stands for Attestation as a Service. It's a Twitter bot that would attest to anything you tweet at it. which reduces the cost of hackership because you don't need to own your own SGX machine. Your privacy is protected by EPID. And right now it returns group out of date because we can't break the latest SGX versions. But critically, our keys are still not revoked. So group out of date means the machine needs an update, but the keys are fine because despite weeks of advance notice, Intel did not still reveal the keys back since August. But well, when we first published this, we immediately got blocked by Twitter. So if we can't rely on Intel to maintain the security guarantees, well, at least we have Twitter. So I'm going to skip on mitigations because Niger is up to get me. One last thing, Yuval and me just started as assistant professors at Michigan and Adelaide, and we're looking for students and postdocs. If you're interested in those sorts of stuff, come talk to us. I don't know why I gave you that.
Yeah. We have time for a quick question. Anyone want to jump? First one to the mic. First one to the mic. Aha. Far away.
Hi. So there are many projects, specifically in the blockchain space, that are using trusted execution environments like SGX.
Good.
Yeah. So my question is, a lot of these people are saying that there will be a T platform that can adequately provide this security and threat model. Do you think so? Because I'm inclined to say no, but I'm curious to hear your opinions.
I declare conflict of interest because I have all possible interest for people to use trusted execution environments and put their money in there because then I'm going to be rich.
Thank you.
Okay, with that bombshell, we'll pass on. We haven't got any. No.
These days? Principal scientist?
No, the title of the talk.
Oh, the title of the talk. And where's the cable? Must be on the floor.
There we go. Stop displaying yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, do you want to do it full screen? Okay, so we move on to the next talk, where Joe is going to talk about RISC-V, RISC-V.
RISC-V. Hi, everybody. Thank you to the RWC organizers for asking me to come and give you a very short, pointed talk about RISC-V. The point of this talk, and actually it's a great segue from the last excellent talk on Foreshadow, is that RISC-V is a new opportunity for those of us who are old enough to remember when CPU and IS instruction set architecture design was cool. The last time I spoke at Real World Crypto was a few years ago when I talked about Galois's work on Cryptol and SAW, and we open sourced it so that you could formally reason about cryptographic algorithms and implementations. And that work has seen great impact and promise, both in academia and industry. You might have seen we've been working on formally verifying much of Amazon's crypto code and things like that. At that same point in time, we started working in the universe of RISC-V concurrently, and in particular, focusing on how do you design actually secure processors that have things like cryptographic extensions and hardware. So what I want to tell you about today is why I'm excited about this and why a bunch of folks, researchers, both in academia and industry, are getting involved in RISC-V because it represents enormous opportunities for doing new foundational work in security for the world where you don't have the shitty baggage of Intel and ARM. Can I get some hurrahs for that? Okay. All right. This talk was prepared with Helena, who's in the audience somewhere, who works with me on these topics. She's back there, and she will be around through the end of the event. Joe Shi from NVIDIA, who's not here, Richard, who's not here, and Dan Zimmerman, who's sitting up here as well. So there's 3 of us that you can talk about these topics in great detail for the remainder of the event. Now, what is RISC-V? I know that, all right, so how many of you are actually hardware geeks? How many of you would classify yourself? So it's a fairly small subset of the audience. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Cheeky guy. So RISC-V is just a new kind of processor. It's a new kind of instruction set architecture, and it's the 5th version of RISC. And that means, hopefully, we've learned from the previous 4 versions of RISC over the years. Oh, did you? I'm sorry? Yeah. Hopefully. It's high quality, and the reason it's exciting is that it's license-free and royalty-free. Anyone in the world can build a RISC-V chip, and you don't have to pay anyone a damn thing. Moreover, there's a huge number of researchers moving into this topic so that we can design these chips in principled ways. And maybe you're not banging rocks together using ancient hardware design languages like Verilog. It's also designed from everything from tiny microcontrollers to big multi-core systems. So it has flexibility in the underlying principles of the ISA. And that means that if you have an interest in one particular flavor of CPU, or maybe one particular flavor of crypto, like earlier discussions about lightweight crypto and Speck and Simon, you can play in different product models, shall we say. Development started in summer 2010 at Berkeley, and the early workshops were funny because it was basically just two professors and a bunch of graduate students in a room together. But the most recent RISC-V Summit, which is our regular, almost yearly conference where people get together, had over 1,000 attendees, and hundreds of companies showed up. There's been a super explosion of interest in this topic, and it's not because of blockchain. Now, the cool thing here is RISC-V represents a platform for doing open source and open hardware R&D and product dev. So companies care about it and research groups care about it. And you can do so at very low cost because nearly all the tools you need to design and very soon fab a RISC-V chip are free. The community has grown tremendously. So at the latest RISC-V Summit in December, we had twice the attendance at the previous one, which is only a year earlier. 250 abstracts were submitted, 59 sessions, 29 exhibitors. And in this year alone, there will be something between 10 and 100 million RISC-Vs in silicon in products. That's how quickly this world has exploded. That means that if you get involved in this community, like I hope some of you will, you have an ability to have a hand in building something clean and beautiful and actually secure for the world because people are shipping these chips. Some of the biggest companies in the world have made announcements this past 12 months about pivoting from, in the main, ARM to RISC-V for their products. The foundation is a nonprofit foundation that sits and manages RISC-V and facilitates the open, pragmatic development of standards that are everything from the concretization of the ISA and its semantics to various extensions there. And what I encourage you to do in looking into RISC-V is to consider not just the fact that you might want to play with it, but you might want to influence this development. Because joining the foundation, even as an individual, gives you the ability to have a direct hand in the evolution of the platform and to show off your stuff and publish papers and the like. And a yearly membership to the foundation is $99. You know, it's nothing. University membership, I think at the moment, is only $249 for the entire university to join, which is nothing. So I would very much suggest that you get involved in the foundation. Now, why is RISC-V interesting, and why does it excite like us at Galois, right? We're historically known for being geeks and doing things like principled systems development and formal methods and formal reasoning about software and now hardware systems. It's beautiful because its design principles match that which I need to develop secure platforms. It's extremely simple. The ISA itself, the instructions that you get, can be described in a very short document and are very clean and have nice semantics. It's a clean slate design. It learned lessons from the past, and each and every design decision made in the ISA has a design rationale based upon the past that stretches back to the 1960s. It's modular, so you get a small core base ISA, and each time you want to explore a new domain that may be concretized by virtue of a set of new instructions, or for example, a new kind of device or a new memory map device, it's done in a principled orthogonal way, so we can focus on different topics separately, each of which has its own design decisions. It's designed for extension and specialization so that we can have different RISC-Vs in the world, and they can be mutually compatible on the subset of instructions that they use, but each one can specialize with extensions in a principled way. At the two most recent RISC-V summits, the CPUs demonstrated were in the main multi-core RISC-Vs, which also had domain-specific accelerators, principally around things like bit-level operations, vector operations, matrix multiplication, AI algorithms, deep learning algorithms, and the like. You can do that in hardware from day one because for two reasons. One is you can play right away because it's all open and free. Wow, I can actually take a CPU and extend it, and I don't have to pay anybody. Especially I don't have to pay a royalty to ARM year upon year. Secondly, the design tools used by most of the groups in this realm are not old school hardware design languages. Instead, they're modern design languages that come principally from the programming languages community that are familiar to people who are geeks with things like object-oriented programming or functional programming and the like. So you're not programming these things as if they're hardware and old school concurrent crazy systems that no one understands. You're programming them like you're writing Java, or you're writing something that looks like Haskell, something higher level. Lastly, it's stable. We've now reached a point in standardization where the base description of the ISA and the core standard extensions are frozen, so we have backwards compatibility, and all the additions are through optional extensions. Now, security is key here. Nobody wants to build a new processor and get security wrong, in essence, and we think this affords a great opportunity to get it right because of the clean foundation. So there is a security standing group, which is essentially the group of folks that keep track of and help guide what's going on in the security subdomain of this new CPU. It's led by Helena. I'm the vice chair of that group. And we spin off, in the context of need and R&D, different task groups to focus on different security-related aspects of this platform. There are two active groups at the moment. One, naturally, is cryptographic extensions. These are instructions specific to running cryptographic algorithms, which in turn depend upon two other extensions, a bit manipulation extension and a vector extension. And so they're currently standardizing the sorts of things you would expect, basically suite B++. But here, we're learning the lessons of the past about how crypto was done wrong in Intel and ARM, as well as previous RISC-V. The chair of that group is Richard Newell at Microchip, which used to be Microsemi until they got bought this year. The vice chair of that group is Dan, sitting in the front. So if you have an interest in having a direct hand in the development of core crypto in a new processor that's going to dominate the market, I imagine, in the coming years, because of the zero license cost, if nothing else, come talk to Dan. Secondly, and perfect for that last talk, there's a TEE, a Trusted Execution Environment Working Group, trying to design from first principles, learning from the lessons of the past. I want to fist bump 14 times. What was done wrong with things like SGX, Trust Zone, and some of the more esoteric enclaves we see when we work in the DoD. This group is chaired by Joe Shi at NVIDIA, and they're basically focusing on different shaped enclaves appropriate for different sized CPUs and different use cases. There's currently 2.5, maybe 3 now, open source enclaves that have been developed, one of which has an assurance case out of Berkeley and MIT. And those plus new ideas are moving into this research group. And we may even see first silicon in a new trusted execution environment, RISC-V, by the end of this year. You'll notice that Joe is at NVIDIA. NVIDIA has announced that they have thrown out their old custom-grown microcontroller, which is in every single GPU in this room, that's an NVIDIA, of course, and replaced it with a RISC-V core. And that RISC-V core must have a trusted execution environment in it to guarantee that code loaded into that GPU that has control over matters related to clock and energy and the like is a signed piece of code. The reason for that is if you can manipulate that in a GPU, you can make a machine catch on fire. So the security-related R&D that's going on now is really exciting. Yes, that's your next. Yes, we'll talk about that later. So here's the reasons why you might also get excited from extra dimensions. There already exist several mechanized formal specifications of the entire ISA in theorem-proving environments and in tools, including from MIT, SRI, Cambridge, us, and a company called Symbiotic EDA. That means if you're at the intersection of formal methods and security, it's a wonderful place to be because people are working on this work with you. Adam is right here. Adam Chapala is the co-author of one of those, and it's one of the best. So come talk to him if you're into that. Several cryptographic extension implementations are underway. Some of them are written by hand, reusing existing open source crappy AES implementations in hardware. Some are being synthesized automatically and are formally verified. People are working on leaking and side channel free implementations. Secure boot work is going on. How do you do secure boot work properly? Learning from the lessons of the past, both from the world of Intel and Apple, as well as from the god-awful thing that is U-boot and similar in the Linux world, where we boot a Linux kernel to boot a Linux kernel to boot a Linux kernel. And then lastly, there are teams funded by government working on this topic, creating dozens of different secure SOCs, principally using formal methods in the main. So we're seeing really novel new CPU architectures. This is called the SITH program, funded by DARPA MTO office. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this later this year because there's going to be a public demonstration of those processors. I encourage you to care. It's a clean ISA, it's a clean extension framework. Learning about and playing in this world feels more like writing software than hardware. That's where the world has evolved. You can run real hardware by buying literally a $99 FPGA. And programming that FPGA and running real simulated hardware is as easy as what you do today for normal software. Many companies are developing products here. So as you learn about this, you have opportunity to work with other companies, either as an individual or as a company. And there's a real low barrier for learning and entrance. I encourage you to get involved also because there's a ton of low-hanging fruit. There's dozens of interesting publications to be written about this area, even pivoting excellent work from other ISAs or from the world of software into the world of hardware. For more information, go to the RISC-V website, look for it on Twitter, LinkedIn. There are open mailing lists and groups. These slides will be public, the talk will be public, and come talk to those of us actively involved. Thank you very much.
We have time for a couple of questions. If anyone wants to ask a question. There we go.
So if I write software that's supposed to run on a RISC-V, how do I know which extensions are going to be present?
Yeah.
What do I do if they're not there?
Yeah. So essentially, so when you write software to RISC-V, like let's say you're writing some C code, you indicate to the compiler, like you would for any cross compilation, which extensions you depend upon. And that's built into the binary itself. There's also a means by which to query the system to understand if various extensions exist or don't exist to take advantage of them. So it just feels like you're working on any old system like an Intel where, like on SGX box, you can query whether an SGX exists or not. It's the same sort of thing. So it's just an extra command line flag more often than not.
Okay, but you expect that there'll be a small enough set
Correct.
of standard extensions that
Yeah,
developers can rely on?
Indeed.
Yeah.
What we're finding is there's a core set of extensions that it seems like everyone, or at least the product world, agrees upon, and that we expect to be the core common that you would compile to regularly unless you're doing specialty work. That's, for example, called R64G, which basically means the core set of extensions you need to run a multi-user operating system. And those standard clusters get standardized as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question over there.
Given some of the difficulties of eliminating side channels when you're building like a secure enclave or trusted execution environment, have you thought about building out a separate, distinct hardware secure element, kind of more similar to like the Titan M chip in new Android devices?
Yes, I have, and if you Google my name, you'll find some published work on such, but much of the work going on that topic is not yet public, shall we say. But yes, this affords great opportunity and such.
Okay, so let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Okay, well, wait till we've actually got the slides working. Okay, so our third talk of the session is going to be by Emma, and she's going to talk about True 2F.
Thanks. Okay, is that better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about True2F, a system for backdoor-resistant authentication tokens. This work was done both at Stanford and at Google with Henry Corrigan-Gibbs, David Mazieres, Dan Bonnet, and Dom Rizzo. And our paper will be appearing at Oakland this spring. So you probably all are aware that hardware authentication tokens are an especially effective form of second-factor authentication, with U2F tokens being especially popular. These U2F tokens are surprisingly effective. Since Google mandated last year that all its employees use these security keys, they haven't discovered a single instance of corporate credential theft, showing just how effective these tokens are. So the U2F protocol has two stages. So the first stage is registration, when a user associates their token with some account. So the server sends some identifier to the token generates some server-specific ECDSA key pair, and sends the public key back to the server. And this is a highly simplified version, and it's important that the server-specific key pair be unique per server to provide unlinkability. The second step, authentication, is run when a user wants to log into their account. So the server sends some identifier along with a challenge. The token recovers that server-specific secret key to sign the challenge and sends a signature back to the server, which is then able to verify the signature using the public key it obtained during registration. So this challenge response protocol provides a really strong defense against phishing attacks as well as browser compromise. So if you correctly register your if you correctly register your token with some site, even if malware takes over your browser, it can't authenticate without interacting with the token. So all your secrets remain entirely on the device and aren't known to the browser. And so this provides a really strong defense against browser compromise. But what about token compromise? So we can imagine some attacker who controls the supply chain, who's able to backdoor the token in a way that seriously undermines the security of the U2F protocol. So here, let's imagine some supply chain attacker who builds into the token some secret key that the attacker knows. So now the user goes and registers at github.com, and the token sends back the public key corresponding to the secret key that the adversary knows. So now the user is registered at this site. The secret key that's supposed to be entirely on the token is actually also known to the adversary. And this seriously undermines the security of the U2F protocol. And so to address this problem, we present True2F, which is an enhancement of U2F. So we have three primary goals in True2F. The first is to augment U2F to provide a strong protection against backdoor tokens. So we want to provide the original protections of U2F, as well as protect against these supply chain attacks. So in particular, we want to provide strongest link security between the token and the browser, where if either the token or the browser is honest, we can make certain security guarantees. We want to do this while maintaining backwards compatibility with existing U2F servers. And this is important for real-world deployment. So your token and your browser are both running true2F, but the existing server that you're authenticating with is running original U2F. Finally, we also want to be performant on commodity hardware tokens. We want this to be actually usable, and so it should run relatively quickly with only a firmware update to existing tokens. So to achieve these three goals, we follow the following two design principles. So the first principle is both the browser and the token should contribute randomness to the protocol. And so this prevents the token from using a form of bad randomness. Also, all deterministic token operations should be verifiable by the browser. So U2F has these two protocol steps, and in true2F, we add an additional third protocol step, initialization, which you run after purchasing the token and before registering it with any sites. So I'm going to start off by talking about initialization. And to create initialization, our approach is guided by the idea that both the browser and the token should contribute randomness to the protocol. So our goal in initialization is to generate this master key pair split between the token and the browser. And we're going to use this master key pair in subsequent phases. We can't generate this master key pair entirely on the browser because we don't want the browser to ever know the master secret key. We also don't want to generate it entirely on the token because we don't want the token to be able to influence the choice of key. And so we want both the token and the browser to contribute randomness, and so we run this collaborative key generation protocol. So we want this protocol to have the following two properties. So the first property we want is that the token can't bias the public key that the protocol outputs. The second property is the browser should learn nothing about the secret key. So there's actually a protocol that already does this. However, it's pretty slow on the hardware that we're using. We're working with a relatively small embedded device, and we want this protocol to be pretty fast. So we present a protocol that runs roughly 3 times faster than this existing protocol. So I'm just going to walk you through our faster protocol. So we use some group G, a prime order queue. Here the NIST P256 curve, and ECDSA key pairs having the form of x and g to the x. So the browser starts off by choosing some values r and v. It sends a commitment to r and v to the token, and the token then randomly chooses some v prime value. It sends back to the browser g to the v prime, and then the browser is able to set the master public key value to be big V prime times g to the v. So the master public key is of the form g to the v plus v prime. The browser then opens its commitment to the token and sends back v and r. The token is able to check that the commitment is equal to the hash of v and r. And if this is the case, it sets the master secret key to be v plus v prime. And otherwise, the token aborts. So at the end of this protocol, the token should hold some master secret key of the form v plus v prime, and the browser should hold some master public key of the form g to the v plus v prime. And so the token contributes randomness in the form of v prime, browser contributes randomness in the form of v. So the first property we wanted was that the token can't bias the public key that the protocol outputs. This is the case because the browser contributes v, so the token can't influence the choice of key pair. The second property we wanted is that the browser learns nothing about the secret key except for the public key. And this is the case because the browser only knows g to the v prime as well as v, and so it can't derive the master secret key, which is v plus v prime. So that's initialization. I'm going to talk now about registration. And our approach to registration is driven by the idea that all deterministic token operations should be verifiable by the browser. So just as a reminder, in registration, the server sends some identifier to the token. The token is then able to generate some server-specific key pair and sends the public key back to the server. So you can imagine some supply chain attack mounted specifically on registration. The account identifier is sent to the token. The token then generates some public key that hides information about the secret key for another site. The token sends this public key back to evil.com, and evil.com is able to learn the secret key for github.com. So this cryptographic secret that was supposed to remain entirely on the token has now been exfiltrated to evil.com. It's known by the adversary. We don't want this to happen. And so to prevent this type of attack, we present this new primitive called verifiable identity families, or VIFs. And VIFs leverage the master key pair that we generated at initialization. So One way in which we could derive these server-specific key pairs is by using collaborative key generation repeatedly. However, the problem with that is that if you registered a bunch of sites, you have to store all these key pairs on this relatively small embedded device, and that becomes expensive if you registered a lot of sites. And so VIFs allow us to derive server-specific key pairs in a deterministic and verifiable way from a master key pair. So we want the following properties for our VIFs. So first, the token should be able to produce the unique key pair for github.com. And it's important that this key pair is unique, because then the token can't leak information through the choice of key pair. Second, the token should be able to prove to the browser that that public key is really the unique public key for that site. So the browser should be able to audit the token's behavior. The third property we want is that the VIF public key for github.com should be indistinguishable from a random ECDSA public key. And this is important for maintaining the unlinkability property present in traditional U2F. The fourth property we want is that the browser shouldn't be able to forge signatures under VIF-generated public keys. And this is important for maintaining the underlying security of U2F. So given these four properties, I'm just going to walk through what these VIFs look like at a high level. So the token holds the master secret key, browser holds the master public key, server sends some identifier to the token. The token now is going to run this VIF eval routine. So it uses some master secret key and the identifier to generate some server-specific key pair as well as a proof. Sends this public key and proof back to the browser. And the browser is then able to use this master public key and proof to verify that this public key really is the one unique public key associated with github.com. So if this proof verifies, the browser then sends the public key back to the server. So this is what this looks like at a high level. I'm now going to walk through a simplified construction in more detail. And I'll explain why this is simplified and we actually need more later on. So again, we're using some group G of prime order Q, the NIST P256 curve. The token holds some master secret key X, and the browser holds some master public key G to the X. So the server sends some github.com identifier. The token is now going to calculate this value alpha, which is just the hash of github.com, and set the secret key to be alpha times X. The server-specific public key is just G to the alpha times X. So the token sends this public key back to the browser. The browser then also generates this value alpha and checks if the public key is equal to big X to the alpha. And if this is the case, the browser knows that this public key was in fact generated correctly and is able to send it back to the server. So the first property we wanted is that the token can produce the unique key pair for github.com. So the simplified construction satisfies that because the secret key is generated as alpha times X, and that alpha value is unique for github.com. The second property we wanted is that the token can prove to the browser that public key is really the unique public key for github.com. This is also satisfied because the browser can calculate the value alpha and verify that big X to the alpha is in fact the public key. However, the third property that we wanted, unlinkability, is not satisfied by this simplified construction. And this is the case because this alpha value can be calculated by the browser without interacting with the token. And so this can allow some site to actually, can allow some adversary to track the token across sites. And so to fix this problem, instead of just using a hash function for alpha, we instead use verifiable random functions. And if you're curious about how we do this, you can check out the paper for more details. Don't have the time to explain it fully here. And then for unforgeability, we actually prove this using for our full construction in the paper. So again, if you're curious, you can check out the paper. So these VIFs present the supply chain attack that I presented earlier. So if the token tries to choose some bad public key that contains information about the secret key for another site, the browser will recognize that this isn't the one unique public key that it's supposed to be sent for this site, and will prevent this information from being exfiltrated to some server. So that's registration. I'm now going to move on to authentication. And our approach to authentication is the idea that both the browser and the token should contribute randomness to the protocol. So just a reminder, in authentication, server sends some challenge, token recovers the server-specific key pair, and uses the secret key to sign the challenge, sends it back to the server, which can verify it using the public key from registration. So we can imagine another supply chain attack, this time mounted specifically on authentication. So evil.com sends the token some challenge, and then the token actually hides the secret key for github.com in the signature. It sends the signature back, and the server is actually able to learn the secret key for github.com. And so this is possible because ECDSA signatures are not unique. If we could use some unique signature scheme like BLS, this wouldn't be a problem. But we need to use ECDSA to maintain backwards compatibility with U2F servers. To deal with this problem, we present this new primitive we call firewalled ECDSA signatures, which is inspired by work on cryptographic reverse firewalls. So I don't have time to go into the full construction here, but the two ideas behind this new primitive are that first, the token in the browser should use collaborative key generation to generate some signing nonce. And the browser is then able to verify that this signing nonce is in fact incorporated in the signature created by the token. Second, because of ECDSA malleability, namely that there are two potentially valid signatures, the browser actually needs to re-randomize these signatures so the token can't leak information through the choice of which signature it sends. So this work is based closely on previous work on subliminal free and subvergent resistant signature schemes, and you can check out the paper for more details. So now we've gone through all three protocol steps. There's some other contributions that I don't have time to talk about today, like a flash-optimized data structure for storing U2F authentication counters, as well as some cryptographic optimizations that we make that are tailored specifically to our token hardware. And you can check out the paper for these as well. So then we implemented True2F. So on your left, you can see a Google development board running True2F. So this is where we got all our valuation numbers that I'm about to show you. And on your right, you can see a Google production USB token with the same hardware specs. So not currently running True2F, but capable of running it. So when we initially started taking evaluation numbers, we knew that there would be some overhead added in True2F because now we're generating all these proofs on the token. We're doing this collaborative randomness generation. And so our goal was really to reduce this overhead as much as possible to make it actually feasible to use. So here, I'm just showing the authentication protocol latency. So True2F in comparison to U2F, pretty expensive. So 446 milliseconds in comparison to 23 milliseconds. However, as we introduce a variety of cryptographic optimizations, we can actually reduce the latency for True2F to 57 milliseconds in comparison to 23 milliseconds for U2F. So True2F is only about 2.5 times slower than U2F. It's also important to note that when you're authenticating with these, you actually have to tap the token. That test was removed for these numbers, so there's also that additional latency as well. So we were also curious in the delay that the actual end user experiences. So here we're just showing the time from when the browser receives some request to when the browser is actually able to respond. We were curious how much of this time is actually spent doing the crypto and the protocol, both on the token and the browser. And we found that there's actually a fair amount of time being spent in browser overhead, so just parsing messages, for example. And so the user actually doesn't experience this 2.5x overhead. They're only experiencing an additional 20 to 30 milliseconds delay. So the end user actually only sees that True2F is about 12 to 16% slower than regular U2F. Yeah, so actually not that much slower. So in conclusion, we can see from True2F that we don't need to settle for untrustworthy hardware. True2F augments U2F to protect against backdoor tokens, in particular providing strongest link security between the token and the browser. It does this while maintaining backwards compatibility with existing U2F servers, which is important for real-world deployment. It's also practical to deploy in that it's performant on commodity hardware tokens. Our next step is the FIDO standards body, which is responsible for the U2F standard. We'll be presenting there at the end of the month, and are hoping that True2F will be included in the next batch of U2F standards, so it can actually reach real users. And if you're interested, you can check out our paper for more details, and thank you.
OK, we have shed loads of questions, so we'll go first to Ollie.
OK, first, great talk, great protocols. For the trust model that you had in mind, the original U2F has U and has 2. So the U means that it's universal and it's not necessarily bound to one browser. You can roam around the world and use it. I mean, I could not envision all possible use for it, but it's public key, so you can have a cert and be recognized by anybody, not necessarily one browser. So this is one limitation of your protocol. The second one, the 2 means that it's a second factor, and one mitigation for supply chain is your password as first factor, which the supply chain probably cannot get. Just these 2 remarks. But of course, you have a different trust model and you do the right things for it.
Yeah, so those are both really good points. And so to address the first point, the point where you might use multiple browsers with this, that's actually an interesting point that we consider a little bit in our paper. And we actually consider using sync state across multiple browsers. So in the same way that your bookmarks are synced across different instances of Chrome, your state about this token could also be synced. In response to your second question about, you have this password anyways, FIDO2 actually allows these U2F tokens to be used as a first factor as well. And so there is this move towards only being able to use these tokens, and so these supply chain attacks become more of a real problem. But those are both really good points. Thanks.
Okay, cool. We've got 4 questions left here, so we've got to be really quick, so really fast questions and answers.
So on follow-up on his remark, actually Chrome is not the only browser or the only application that says U2F. So you have Firefox, Brave, and also a multitude of command line utilities. So the solution of, Chrome can sync is not a solution. But otherwise, yes, for your security model, it works. But I don't think it covers all the use cases of U2F.
Yeah, and this is a really good point. So if you use both Chrome and Firefox, you might need like 2 different U2F tokens, for example, or you might need to think about how much if you care more about your security or your security using this true2F token, or if you cared more about using multiple browsers. So that's a trade-off that an individual user would have.
We have to move on because there's other people who want questions. So come, go. You two, you go, then you two. Yep.
In the U2F protocol, during the registration ceremony, the token passes back a blob of binary data that is like the credential identifier, and that can be used to actually wrap the secret key, like some tokens do it that way. I'm curious if there are any mitigations that you can provide to sort of prove that the credential ID itself is not being used as a side channel.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I actually presented a really limited version of the U2F spec. And so I think you're referring to the key handle, and the browser actually chooses the key handle itself, and then the token generates the server-specific key pair using that key handle. And so that's how we prevent the key handle from leaking information.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, these 2 questions, and then that's it.
Okay. So I saw in a couple of places that you are very concerned with preventing the token from basically communicating arbitrary data out to servers because it might be able to use that ability to leak data. And it's very impressive that you could find cryptographic means to limit the token's ability to communicate through that channel. I wonder, as a matter of threat modeling, whether that's the only or main channel that one needs to worry about a backdoor token using to leak data, as opposed to the fact that it's a USB device, maybe it implements other USB classes, or maybe some kind of RF thing or something. So are there other channels in addition to this sort of front door talking to the server channel that should also be considered for protecting against backdoors?
Yes, this is a great question, and true2F largely considers in-protocol covert channels. However, there are other channels that we consider in our paper as well, like timing attacks as well as failure attacks, and like you mentioned, USB tokens. They can launch all these other types of attacks. Those are a little bit outside of the scope of our paper, and we're still thinking about defenses against those, and those are really valid concerns, but obviously hard to solve all of those problems in one go. But that's a great question.
Okay, Tanya.
Yeah, quick question on the crypto. Probably it's just because of the abstraction for the talk, but when you work against being the attacker linking the keys, you say, okay, you can't use the alpha as a hash of the domain. But since the public key is not known to anybody but the browser, why don't you just hash in that as well? And that seems simpler, but probably there's something that's not obvious.
Yeah. So you actually, so yeah, the point is a little bit subtle, and you can check out the paper since there's like some detailed proofs for why you actually need these verifiable random functions. But you do in fact need that to provide this unlinkability because the output that the token, the alpha value should actually appear random without this proof from the token. I'm happy to talk with you offline if you're interested.
Okay, that's thank you, and thank you for all the questions, and let's thank the speaker again. So this is going to be the last talk of the day, and this is the one you've been waiting for. This is either because you want to protect, I know there's some people in the audience want to protect their assets, and there's some people in the audience actually want to obtain the assets. So we're going to work out how to steal Greg's car, or Brian's, or someone else's, I don't know. Pick whichever car you want to steal. Okay, let's learn it.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Lennart Wouters, and I'm here to steal Teslas today. Someone told me it would be very interesting to steal this Tesla on the slide. There's probably only 2 people in the room that get the inside joke. But really, we can steal any Tesla. So on the left, you have a Tesla key fob. So it's actually a miniature Tesla. And on the right, you have the real Tesla. The way the protocol works is, if you have the key in your pocket and you approach the car will send you a challenge, the key fob computes a response and sends it back to the vehicle. If the vehicle computed the same response, it will unlock, and the same protocol is repeated to start the vehicle. Now, if we actually take one of these key fobs and we open them up, you can see on the backside a few components. There's a UHF PCB antenna, there's a low frequency antenna, and there's a UHF transmitter. This is not very interesting. On the front side, we have this big black chip, and that's the Texas Instruments TMS 37F128. Now, the rightmost picture is actually an X-ray of this package. And as you can see, there are 2 chips inside of this package, or 2 dies. The top one is a transponder. It actually stores the cryptographic key and performs all of the cryptographic operations. At the bottom, we have a general purpose MSP430 microcontroller that runs all of the application code. And it can query the transponder over an SPI interface. Datasheets for these chips are not freely available, so you have to sign NDAs to get them. But what you can find online is some general information about what these chips can do. So for example, it says that you can protect code readout using a JTAG fuse. It can do DST80, which is a proprietary 80-bit cipher. And a challenge response protocol uses a 5-byte challenge and a 3-byte response. The protocol can also implement mutual authentication. So because we cannot get the datasheet for this chip, and also buying them is very difficult. So if you just go on Farnell or DigiKey, you cannot buy these chips. You need to buy large quantities and sign NDAs. Luckily at COSIC, I also have a lot of international colleagues. So we just bought the chips in China. And once we got one of these chips, we actually noticed that they use a very uncommon package type. So we had to design our own breakout board, and then we could start and connecting these chips. Now, there's little to no public information, but the public information that is available is also very inconsistent. So these are 2 distinct pinouts for this same chip that are provided by TI. So you kind of have to guess what the correct one is and hope it all works. So the chip we bought is actually only the transponder without the extra microcontroller. So our first step was to try and interface with this chip to send SPI commands to it. So we used a regular Arduino. And as I said, it was a bit of a mess just to get started because we had to figure out what the correct pinout was. This is what it looks like if you have everything connected up on a breadboard. And then we can send SPI commands to the transponder. So SPI, as most of you probably know, usually uses 3 communication lines. So you have a clock line, a data line for data going from the master to the slave, and a data line for data going back from the slave to the master. You can also see the general SPI structure in this slide. So there's always a length byte, which indicates how many bytes will follow the length byte. Then there's a command byte that indicates what action you want the transponder to perform, and maybe some data, like a challenge. The transponder might respond with a response. Now, in this case, TI actually decided to add a fourth line, which is called the busy line. And this busy line is used by the slave, in this case a transponder, to indicate to the master when it is ready to receive the next byte of data. Now, what we actually did was to exploit this busy line. So it's also used to throw errors. The transponder can indicate, I don't know that command byte, and then it will throw an error by holding the busy line low or high for an extended period of time. A second observation we made is that if you set the length byte to FF, so its maximum value, the chip will actually throw you an error after the correct number of bytes was received. So if you set the length byte to FF and then iterate through all of the values of the command byte, you can uncover all of the existing commands and the correct number of bytes you have to provide. You can apply this technique in an automated fashion, and in that way, recover all of the interesting commands in this chip. So what we found was that there's 2 commands to set a 40-bit key, not an 80-bit key. And then we found 4 commands that actually use these keys. So there's a DST40 command, and there's a DST unknown command. So at this point, we found 2 40-bit ciphers and 2 40-bit keys, but we were actually expecting an 80-bit key and an 80-bit cipher. So we made the assumption that maybe they combined 2 40-bit ciphers in the hopes of getting an 80-bit secure cipher. That's not actually what they did, but what I did for the following 2 months was to reverse this unknown cipher. And this is a hardware implementation, so this is a black box approach where you send challenges, you observe the response, and in that way figure out what's going on the inside. This took a lot of time. Afterwards, I had to figure out how they might have combined these 2 commands. So I finally got my hands on an actual Tesla Model S key fob, and we realized that they didn't blow the JTAG fuse. So we could simply dump the MSP430 firmware, disassemble it. In this case, I used Binary Ninja with an MSP430 plugin, and then perform some initial static analysis. So usually, all microcontrollers, what you do is you look at the interrupt vector table, and this will tell you which code is run when the microcontroller is reset, or for example, when you press a button on the key fob. Another thing you can do is look at the special function registers. So the registers that are used to communicate data over SPI. So once we identified which routine is actually transmitting data over SPI, we could go over to dynamic firmware analysis, where we set breakpoints at interesting regions and then dump the memory when something occurs. So we basically applied this a few times while actually going up to the car and unlocking it, so that we could see which commands were sent over SPI and which data was received. After doing this a few times, we realized that they only use command 86, which we already knew was DST40. So you can imagine at this point I was very frustrated that I spent 2 months reverse engineering the other cipher. Now what is this DST40? So DST40 is a cipher introduced back in 2000 by Texas Instruments. It uses a 40-bit key, and it was first reverse engineered by Bono et al. Back in 2005. Back then, the cipher was only used in immobilization systems and in a speed bus payment system. So if we take a look at the cipher, at the bottom you can see a 40-bit key register that's used in an LFSR. This LFSR is updated every 3rd round, starting in the 2nd. At the top you have the challenge register, and after applying 200 rounds of the cipher, each round produces 2 bits of output, you get the 24-bit response. These are the 24 bits marked in red. One thing to note here is that the response is actually smaller than the challenge. So for each challenge, there will be multiple keys that produce the same response. Now at this point, we knew that we could break this key fob because it's a 40-bit key, but we still had to figure out how to actually communicate with the vehicle and with the key fob. And in order to do that, we had to reverse engineer the RF protocol. Now, in this specific key fob, you can actually identify 2 distinct systems. So there's a remote keyless entry system. And this is the type of system where you have to press a button, and then the key fob sends a message to the vehicle. This is one-way communication. Secondly, there's a passive keyless entry and start system, in which there is two-way communication. The car sends something to your key fob, and the key fob replies. So I started off by looking at the remote keyless entry system, because it's actually easier to receive and transmit UHF packets. And once you know some basic physical layer information, you can easily receive and transmit messages. So we figured out that the key fob uses a 40-bit counter. Every time you press a button on the key fob, it will increment the counter and use this 40-bit value as a challenge. It then computes the response and sends this back to the car. You can see that in the packet structure, there's one command byte. This is used to indicate if you want to open doors or close the doors. Also, part of the counter is sent along so that the car and the key fob can stay synchronized. This is a very common implementation of what is called a rolling code. Now, a small issue with this system is that the command is not actually authenticated. So if you are able to capture a valid lock message, you can change it into an unlock message. And this is often exploited in a role jam type of attack. Now, to show that we can actually do the same thing, here I show that I can unlock the car, open the trunk, and open the trunk. Opening one of these vehicles is fun and cool to do, but it's even cooler if you can drive off with it. And in order to do that, you need to understand the passive keyless entry and start system. And like I mentioned, in this case, there's two-way communication. So we also need to be able to receive low-frequency signals. And this turned out to be much more annoying than these ultra-high frequency signals. So what we had to do was we took a Proxmark 3 because it supports this specific frequency. And in this case, we had to write our own code for the microcontroller. We had to modify the hardware. And we also had to write our own Verilog code for the FPGA. In the end, this is what the signals look like. So we have the signal received by the antenna at the top. Then it goes through an amplification stage. There's an analog peak detect circuit. And then the FPGA outputs the bottommost signal, which is interpreted by the microcontroller, which then sends the raw bits to the laptop. Now, receiving these LF signals was very frustrating. And this means that I had to spend a few of my weekends like this. So I basically taped the Proxmark's antenna very close to one of the transmitting antennas of the vehicle. So there's one antenna at the rear view mirrors, and there's also another antenna in the center cup holder. So once you can receive low-frequency signals and ultra-high-frequency signals, we can build a protocol analyzer. So I built a simple Python tool that allows me to see all of the data coming in over LF and all of the data coming in over UHF. Then what you do is you unlock the car a few times, and you stare at the data until you realize what's really going on. So we figured out that the car is sending a wake message twice a second. It's basically checking if a key fob is in proximity. And this packet contains the car identifier. Now, if a key fob is in range that recognizes this car identifier, it will reply. And it will reply basically with the same packet it received, but it obfuscates it a little. This obfuscation is very basic. So if you receive these wake and reply messages for two vehicles, you can easily spot what's going on. So if the car received the reply, it will send the 40-bit challenge to the key fob. The key fob computes the response and sends it back to the car. The car verifies the response, and if it's correct, it will unlock. So an important thing to note here is that the only thing you need to get a response from a key fob is you need to know the car identifier. And at that point, you can send any challenge you want. So you can perform a chosen input attack. Another kind of attack you could try to do is to try to unlock and start the car without ever seeing the key fob. So a car-only attack. So as I mentioned before, for every 40-bit challenge, there's actually 2 to the 16 keys on average that will produce a correct response. So you could build a tool that just guesses a key, computes a response based on the challenge it received, and sends it to the car. So we calculated that if you can make 1 guess per second, it would take you 97 days to get a valid challenge response pair. The important thing to note here is that this can be automated. Once you send 1 correct response, the car and key fob will actually continuously do the wake and reply to make sure that the key fob is still inside of the car. Once you get 1 challenge response pair, you need a second one, but getting the second one only takes 9 hours after the first one. So in about 100 days, you could drive off with a car without ever seeing the key fob. So what we did next was to build an efficient proof of concept attack, because we wanted to be able to steal one of these cars as fast as possible. So as I mentioned before, we have a 40-bit challenge, a 40-bit key, and these get combined into a 24-bit response. So there's multiple keys that produce the same response, and this also means that you will need multiple challenge response pairs to recover the key. In this case, at least 2. So back in 2005, they built an FPGA cluster using 16 FPGAs, and they could brute force one key in about 1 hour. So what we did was to build a time memory trade-off table. And because we can do a chosen input attack, it's actually a lookup table. So we fix one challenge, we choose one, and then for every single value of the key, we compute a response. All of the keys that produce the same response, we group into one file. So in the end, we end up with a table that's 5.4 terabytes in size that contains 2 to the 24 files, so one file for each challenge. And each of these files contains about 2 to the 16 keys. Now with this table, it then becomes very easy to recover a key. So what you do first is you get the 2-byte car identifier in order to be able to send the challenge to the key fob. You can sniff this from the car or just brute force it. You send our chosen challenge to the key fob and record the response. And you use this response to select the correct file in the table. At this point, there's only 2 to the 16 possible values of the key left. Next, you send another random challenge to the key fob and observe the response. And using the second pair, you test the remaining 2 to the 16 keys. This takes about 2 seconds on a Raspberry Pi. Then we, of course, implement this attack in hardware. So there's a small device we made. I actually have it with me here today. So as you can see, this would easily fit in your purse. If someone wants to take a closer look at it later, come and find me. So at the top, there's a USB power bank. It's the same kind of power bank you use to charge your phone. Then there's a Raspberry Pi 3 that controls all of the RF hardware. At the bottom, there's a Proxmark 3 and a Yardstick 1 that do the LF and UHF communication. After doing all of this research, we obviously also contacted the affected manufacturers. So we tested the attack on a Tesla Model S and reported the issue to Tesla. And then we actually found out that they didn't build the system themselves. So the system was built by Pectron, and we learned that they built similar systems for McLaren, Karma, and Triumph. As you can imagine, I don't have a McLaren. If someone in the audience does have one, please let me know. So we contacted Tesla in August of 2017, and they actually designed a new key fob. So all key fobs in Tesla Model S's released today. There's a newer version. And for existing customers, they also released over-the-air updates, basically a second factor of authentication where you have to enter a PIN to start the vehicle. You have to enable these features. The second feature is the ability to disable passive keyless entry. This is actually a very nice feature because it will also stop relay attacks. And I think Tesla actually did a nice job in handling this issue because it's difficult to fix as it's a hardware issue. And I know that there's some people in the room today that actually helped solve this problem, and I think they deserve a round of applause. So Tesla showed us how to do responsible disclosure correctly. Now let's have a look at the other manufacturers. The other manufacturers don't have any security contacts. So what I had to do was go on LinkedIn, search for people working at these companies, and then email people doing something with electronics or something security related and hope that they would reply. People at Triumph never replied to us. Someone at Karma did reply in the end. We sent them a copy of our paper and they said thank you. McLaren, after contacting about 5 people, someone did reply, but they weren't very enthusiastic about discussing the issues. Now, this is actually the public statement that was made by McLaren. It's still online today, so if you want to read the entire thing, go and look it up. It's very entertaining. So they start off by saying that they have been alerted, which is nice because that means that they acknowledge that we contacted them. And And then they go on by saying the relay attack, and it's obviously not a relay attack. And then they try to explain how a relay attack works, and they say that your car key could be scanned if you leave it close to your vehicle. Now, for those who know how a relay attack works, if you leave your key fob close to your vehicle, I'm not going to bother doing a relay attack. I'm just getting in your car and driving off. The second part is then actually nice because they explain the car-only attack we discussed. So this meant that they actually read the paper we sent them. And they also say that you have to be a skilled attacker to do this. So I was a bit flattered, of course. But then when we read on about this car-only attack, they say the equipment needs to be in very close proximity to a key. It's called a car-only attack. So this is actually the second sentence of a paragraph we sent to them, which says you never need to be in proximity of the key fob. So yeah, but in case you do own a McLaren, don't worry, McLaren is very serious about security. I have a few conclusions about this research. I think most of them are pretty obvious, and the people in this room probably all know them. But it seems that not all people are aware yet. So here we go again. Don't use proprietary cryptography. Don't rely on the secrecy of datasheets or NDAs to protect your systems. And if you're a car manufacturer, you probably have a lot of suppliers. And I think it's better to work with them instead of just buying something from them and hoping it will be secure. And if you need firmware in your system, don't rely on the secrecy of your firmware to make a product secure. Don't put keys in firmware, even if you lock JTAG interfaces. There's probably always a way to get the firmware out. Some other common issues we've seen in these systems is the reuse of keys. So this has been shown a few times in the past, that manufacturers like to reuse keys. And I think it's important that if you design a product like this yourself, that you at least know what the existing security issues are, so that you can design a product that's better. Another important conclusion was actually tweeted by one of my colleagues, and I agree with him. I think it's very ridiculous that there's still companies out there today that don't have a way for security researchers to contact them. So if you're working for a company that doesn't have a security contact up on your website, I think you should change something. And then there was a question from one of my colleagues, and he asked me, like, couldn't you have made a lot of money by just buying Tesla stock? So this is what the stock looked like in September of 2018 for Tesla. Does anyone remember what happened on the 7th of September? It's the big dip in the stock. Yes, exactly. Now, on the 11th of September, when we released the research, you can see that there's another slight dip in the stock price. So this is when we released the video over attack. But then I went on Twitter, and I noticed that Elon Musk tweeted that he would be removing 2 of the 7 colors of the Tesla Model S. So I don't think our security research actually impacted the stock price. To end this presentation, we made a video showing how the attack works in practice. So I'll show you the video, and then afterwards we can have some questions. So the attack scenario of the video is, I think, pretty obvious. It's very easy to find these cars because they need to be charged. So if you go to a Tesla supercharger, you will always find one you can steal. So as I mentioned before, the first part you have to do as an attacker is retrieve the car identifier. You can choose, you can either sniff it from the car because it broadcasts it. So you walk up to it and you sniff it. Then once you do that, you go to the closest Starbucks or whatever that's nearby, where probably the person owning the car is. You send your 2 challenges, record the responses, download the candidate key file, brute force the key, and by the time you're back at the vehicle, you already have the key recovered. Now you can easily unlock the vehicle, unplug it. You can wait until it's charged even. and then you can start the vehicle and drive off. Thank you.
Any questions?
This is a kind of specific, but why were there like 3 separate mechanisms on the key fob when its job is basically just to say like, hi, I'm here, not I'm nearby?
I think it's something that has grown historically. Like at first there were key fobs so you could only press a button and you then had the physical key that you had to turn the key fob with, and then there was usually a transponder in there. And then people always want more convenience, so they came up with this passive keyless entry and start system. And I think they just keep on having the remote keyless entry one. For example, you approach your car and you want to unlock the trunk for someone else or something. You can do it from a bigger distance. Whereas for passive keyless entry, you need to be like 1 or 2 meters away from the car for it to work. I think that's the main reason.
Thanks.
Are there no other questions? Anyone panicked about their car? No, okay. So, I would like to thank Leonard again and thank all the speakers of this afternoon's session. And we'll see you all back here tomorrow morning.